Welcome everyone. We're going to get started in just a couple of moments. Okay, just to honor everyone's time, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much. Welcome to the PSU Futures Collaboratory second of 4 Future of Work webinars for the 2020-2021 academic year. We are so excited about these sessions and very appreciative of you joining today. I want to welcome everyone from Portland State and from guests around the world who are joining us on the webinar, and I am sure that others will be streaming in as we continue. My name is Laura Nissen, and I am the founder of the PSU Futures Collaboratory. I'm a professor of social work, a presidential futures fellow, and a research fellow at the Institute for the Future. And before we get going, I wanted to share just a little bit of history about the PSU Futures Collaboratory. We were established in 2019 by President Stephen Percy to serve as a place where people from across our campus could join in an experimental and improvisational space to explore the topic of the future, and together build the collective skill of foresight. During the last 2 years, we have been visited by an array of amazing and thoughtful futures thinkers and practitioners, Afrofuturists, community leaders, writers, researchers, activists, educators, and scholars, all of whom do creative and impactful work to explicitly shape a better future. And we learned a variety of foresight tools and frameworks, applying them to real world challenges we have at PSU in a variety of ways. What will shifts in our university and community mean for the future of learning, the future of equity, the future of social mobility? What a body of knowledge to be exploring during such a time of rapid change, disruptions, calls for justice, and unprecedented transition. We assume we will occupy an increasingly complex space as a public university, and we're actively envisioning what being ready for the future means to us collectively. We've put together a brief thought piece on how to use futures thinking as we navigate turbulent times and make hard decisions, focused on 3 big questions. These are, whatever role you play at PSU, how much do you find you're focused on solving immediate problems than with an eye towards long-term challenges and opportunities that we have ahead of us? And what might it look like to balance short-term and long-term thinking differently? With a nod to the wonderful higher ed futurist Marie Conway, the second question is, rather than focus on how to survive, what would happen if we were able to flip the script to ask, what does the future need most from us as a public university? And finally, the third question, what parts of our university would we be most wise to protect through all transitions that may come? What parts do we fix and amend? And what parts do we make anew for a new age? Please visit our website. We'll share the link with you during the talk to see more about what we've been doing this year. The site is full of resources, including a special Future of Work page with numerous scans, trend reports, and more related to the future of work and other information about our projects. I want to thank my partner and co-creator of this webinar series, Dr. Sally Mudiamu, Director of International Partnerships at PSU and cornerstone member of the Collaboratory. Also, many thanks to Mr. David Burrow and his team who's helping us with technical aspects. We all share the vision that the future of work is coming, whether we're ready for it or not. Many have suggested that COVID-19 has not so much changed the trajectory of the future's work as much as it has accelerated. Some say as much as by 10 years. There's so much for us to learn together because the future of work is not just happening out there, but it's also happening right here at PSU. The future of work is in many respects a story about equity, justice, human rights, human agency, and the future of well-being. Sometimes the future of work discourse is pitted against the future of higher ed discourse. This is a problem of long-standing tensions and really needs to be acknowledged. Our purpose today is in showing how inextricably connected these two topics are, particularly for a university in which so many of our students are invested deeply in experiencing their own economic mobility as a result of their educations. Our purpose as a university is to provide architecture for students to participate in the world and in their future careers in ways they choose and discover, and that they learn to walk through, break down, and go around barriers that may appear. What must we as a university learn about these changing pathways to the future of work and to meaningful, equitable career trajectories to be effective in serving them in the coming years? How can these lessons make us better and stronger as a university without compromising our values and ideals as educators? I'm a strong believer that universities should not be driven by the dynamics of the future of work, but neither are we free to ignore them. Fortunately, we don't have to. So as I said last week, let's learn together today. Our speaker is Maggie Wooll. She serves as head of strategic insights at the San Francisco-based company BetterUp. It's a company that drives growth and fitness, mental fitness with personalized development, integrating human connection, AI, and behavioral science. She is a researcher, author, and speaker focused on the evolving nature of work and the new practices and structures needed to thrive in an environment constantly reshaped by emerging technologies. She's particularly interested in the intersection of individual well-being, physical, emotional, social, and financial, continuous learning, and management practices to unlock human potential. Following Maggie's remarks, we'll be joined by two PSU respondents, Dr. Matt Carlson, who serves as Associate Dean for Undergraduate Programs, where his area of focus includes enrollment management, undergraduate recruitment, retention, graduation. But he's also a wonderful researcher whose interest is in medical sociology, healthcare access, quality, health disparities, and also a wonderful student from our university, Alexa Rector, who is an undergraduate advertising management major. Her interests range from environmental sustainability, product innovation, and blockchain. After school, she hopes to contribute to a company that promotes outside the box ideas and holds high standards for ethical and environmental responsibility. And you should, if there's anyone listening who's interested in hiring an amazing person, they should hire her. That's all I can say about that. Okay. Then we'll open it up to dialogue from the audience. We'll ask you to use the chat function if you just want to make remarks, but if you have specific questions, please put them in the Q&A area because that is where I'll be pulling audience questions later in our talk. So thank you all again for being here. And with that, I'm going to give Maggie Wooll a warm Portland welcome. We had originally invited Maggie to come speak to the Collaboratory BC before COVID, and literally it got bumped because of complexities associated with the very day everything shut down. So Maggie, it is with all kinds of gratitude and appreciation and admiration that I welcome you to Portland State. Glad to have you with us.
Thank you, Laura. And yeah, better late than never, right? A year in.
Just in time.
Just in time, just when we need it most. And thank you for you and Sally, and just, you know, a moment of appreciation for the fact that you've put together this series and this, you know, this program. It's really, I think, really important and really interesting. And then also thanks to David and Pei for handling the technical side of this. Before we dive in, I want to show you all a video that Wired Magazine did of the Ocado warehouse in the UK. Pei, next slide. So this, I wish that we were all present together. How many of you feel anxious when you see this video? You feel anxious for your students? You feel anxious for society? You feel anxious for yourselves, your kids, your loved ones? Because I do. When I look at this video, intellectually, I think, wow, convergence. And that's my head, but in my heart and like the pit of my stomach, really, they say, where are the people? And where am I in this? And then it's kind of like, oh my God, I need to get my son to build me a robot. But this is one of the greatest fears we have today about the future of work, that robots will take our jobs, that we'll be irrelevant or left behind. And it leaves us with this question, what work will remain for humans? Now, the title of this talk is that the human future of work. And I'd like to suggest that maybe the question, what work will remain for humans, isn't really the right question after all. Next slide, Pei. So the problem we all have is that we're linear thinkers. So when we think about exponential change, we try to hold something constant, and we kind of implicitly assume that the work of today will be static. And we focus on how technology, which we accept is changing really fast, we think about how technology is being applied against this piece right here, this yellow gold tip, which is really today's work. And that's really just the tip of the iceberg. And in reality, several things are changing at once. And it's not just technology. It's technological, it's social, demographic, and environmental. And they affect the workplace and the workforce, but they also affect the work itself. So I think one thing that maybe that's interesting, and Laura can attest to this, is most of what I talk about today is exactly what I would have talked about before the pandemic. It was happening before the pandemic, and it will continue after the pandemic is over. The workforce, today's students, they need our help, but more training programs focused on specific technical skills, they might be necessary, but they're insufficient. And so instead, we need to shift our focus from skilling to cultivating human capabilities. Imagine a work environment in a world where people are constantly developing and getting better and better at raising the bar for themselves. And think about it, what would we gain? Well, one, we'd stop developing programs that fail to close skill gaps and fail to meet the demand for talent. We'd move from a place of fear and anxiety, which is, I think, where we started, to one of optimism and agency. And then third, we'd have people, at the front lines and in leadership who are ready and able to create more value for each other, no matter how fast the world changes. So I'm going to take the next 35 minutes to kind of talk about three things. The first is just what's going on broadly in the world, not just COVID or post-COVID. The second thing we'll talk about is the role of human capabilities in the work of the future. And then the third, we'll look at what's really the challenge for individuals. And then it's going to be your turn, and I'll stop talking. You can ask any burning questions you might have about capabilities, skills, and work. But really, I think it's more of switching gears and into more of an interactive discussion then about how you relate to this as educators and administrators. But before we get started, I'm going to give you a quick background on where this research came from. So much of this work originated from the Deloitte Center for the Edge. The center was a small research entity led by John Hagel and John Seeley Brown. And our mandate was to understand the deep shifts reshaping the world, why they matter, and what to do about them. And we like to say it wasn't what was keeping you up at night, but what should be. I led research at the center up until, as Laura mentioned earlier this year, when I moved to BetterUp. So 12 years ago at the center, we developed the Shift Index, and it was an attempt to quantify the changes we saw in the world around us. And those metrics described a world being reshaped by converging trends that made it easier for information, resources, capital, and people to flow across borders. And then after that, we did a lot of deep research related to how companies and other institutions can succeed in this type of exponential world. And from there, we moved on to, what types of workers and employees those institutions would need. They need people with passion, people who would lean into the challenge and connect with others in order to learn faster and have more impact. And so, as you can see on this slide, basically we wrote a lot of papers, and they're all still available out there if you search online. But what happened is my colleague and I couldn't help but feel like something was missing in this. And we were missing. And so we, in our spare time, we spun up another line of research around what this meant for us as individuals. We've described a world of flow and change. Now, how are we supposed to navigate it? And that leads directly to my current role at BetterUp. At BetterUp, it's really a natural continuation where, say, over the past several years, it became apparent to me how much work needed to be done, both at the organizational level and the individual one, to make work more human and more humane, but also to help our institutions adapt to the future. This exponential world, it's not an easy one. A lot of people were already feeling that. So, Laura talked about, maybe the COVID accelerated the future of work by as much as 10 years. In a lot of ways, I feel like the future of work was already here. We just hadn't acknowledged it. So the status quo was already broken and the pandemic just made it official. So what we have to do instead is we have to learn new ways of being in this world if we're going to be energized by it and create more opportunity for ourselves and others. If we don't figure out new ways of being in this world, if we start seeing only threat and fear, we'll be marginalized, exhausted, and demoralized by the pace of change. And with that, we'll lose the ability to shape our future in positive ways. Next slide, Pei. So what's going on? Next slide. So some of you may have heard this before. We're living in a world that is fast and unpredictable. Anne Pendleton Julian coined the phrase whitewater world, and it applies both at the organizational level as well as at the personal level. You're feeling this pressure, and we all are, because most organizations aren't equipped with good kayaks, much less the ability to navigate them. And for many organizations, it's more like we're trying to sail a steamship in here, or at best, maybe a sailboat down a river rapid. But most of us are feeling the pressure. And there's these competing narratives. There's, on the one hand, we hear there's not enough workers. On the other hand, we hear there's not enough jobs. We hear the pace and demand for new skills is increasing. And the most in-demand talent is hard to find or to hang on to. And then the rate at which specific skills become obsolete is also increasing. And with that is the pressure to figure out what to do with the workers associated with those obsolete skills. And so all of this leads directly to you, not just you, but it leads to you as leaders in the educational space. So in a whitewater world, what you need to do changes minute to minute. And what you need to do depends on the environment around you and under you. But it isn't just that our world is changing fast. That's not just why we talk about it being a whitewater world. I spent a lot of time working with John Seeley Brown, and the way he puts it is the world now is it's rapidly changing, but it's also hyper connected and radically entangled. So every action you take, just like in a kayak, has layers of consequences. Every problem is tied up and tangled up with other problems. And what that does is those two things destroy a past idea. So then the workforce and the leaders and citizens that we need for this whitewater world, they have to be able to get comfortable with ambiguity. And we're all going to have to get better at reading and understanding ambiguity and entanglement, and find ways to work within it. Sorry, guys, I'm just looking at the chat here.
Maggie, since you saw that chat,
yeah, yep.
Could you do us a favor and could you unplug your headphones, plug them back in, maybe blow on them a little bit?
How's it sound?
You sound really good there. I think we just had a funny connection in the jack between your headphones and the just in the male-female jack there that's going on.
Let's try this. How's that sound?
You sound great. Let's continue. Thank you.
Yep, no problem. Sorry about that, guys. Nothing more annoying than a click. Next slide, Pei. We'll just move on. Pei, next slide.
And did we just lose Pei? Oh, good. No?
Oh, actually, yeah, go ahead. Click to the next one. That's fine.
There we go. All right, back going.
All right, like a well-oiled machine, right? We are not machines, we're humans, so the stuff happens. So, let's take a look at, we know we're in this whitewater world. Why is this happening? So we know that not all change happens at the same pace. So on this slide, you can see technology is going up rapidly. Individuals tend to adopt technology first, followed by businesses. Other institutions and public policy lag even further behind. So we've shared this slide a lot, and a lot of people have, kind of grabbed onto this. But if you think about it one step further, and you think about this as really adapting to rather than merely adopting technology, then what you realize is that both businesses and other institutions lag even further behind. So, really to embrace these things, most individuals actually do it pretty quickly. Everything else kind of trails. And so we end up just kind of slapping it down on the things that we're already doing. And, that counts as adoption, not so much really changing the way we work in the world. When I think about the slide too, one thing that was really interesting to me is how in my career for like the last 10 years, we spent half of our time trying to convince leaders that really the world was changing fundamentally, that like you couldn't just, whatever you're thinking about linear progression, that no longer applied, and that the pace and amplification of change would cause greater unpredictability. One really interesting thing about COVID this past year is that those arguments really aren't necessary anymore because, every one of us has experienced significant, rapid, and visceral change. But in this technological environment, over the last decade or so, individuals as consumers, as customers, and as workers have gained power, having more visibility into their options, developing greater expectation for products, services, educational experiences, and even employment that fits their unique needs and preferences. And what's happened is traditional institutions, including companies, government, and education, have generally really struggled to keep up. Next slide, Pei. So this is a favorite. I use this slide in any talk I give, but our old ways of working can't really deliver the results that we need for today, much less for the future. And this picture I took in my neighborhood a few years ago, right after I'd moved in. These were not my encyclopedias, but I must admit when I saw this, I was tempted. I love books, and I grew up always wanting to know everything. But in the world of Google and Wikipedia, these encyclopedias have become irrelevant. And so also I was trying to know everything. And, when people see this, everybody laughs. They're like, encyclopedias. And Wikipedia even now feels like such an old concept. But really think hard about it. What other big old bricks of certainty are you still lugging around? At any rate, for this picture for me is just always a sign of changing times. And it's a reminder. An old example or not, if you think of Wikipedia, it was created through imagination, creativity, and massive amounts of distributed collaborative work. And that's both a threat and an opportunity. Old ways of work are going to change, but we have the opportunity to shape what the future could look like. Next slide, Pei. So if the way we were working pre-COVID wasn't working and still isn't, what should we do instead? Next slide, thank you. So the work of the future will be a platform to shift from scalable efficiency, where our organizations and systems and practices were oriented around knowability, to a future state of scalable anticipation, where organizations, systems, and practices have to reorient around learning, adapting, and shaping. And I'll give you an example. So there was an executive last year who said to me, the world was never predictable. Business was never predictable. And that's true, but businesses had an annual budgeting process. And that, combined with a forecast of how many units they would sell, that drove the rest of the company: production planning, procurement, supply chain, hiring. And for a typical consumer product, the units sold was directly related to the amount of the dollars that were spent on marketing. So companies really kind of could forecast. And they built their infrastructure, their physical and IT and workforce infrastructure. They built it all around those rigid processes. Now, of course, unexpected things happened, but companies could generally treat the world as predictable. And for the most part, they could be successful doing that. That isn't the case anymore. So with the fragmentation of customer needs, the speed of information and sentiment on social media, the fracturing of social media that we've seen in this past year, and the exposure of global supply chains, it is impossible for any company to ignore that the world is unpredictable and that what they're selling, how they're doing it, and who you're serving is much more dynamic. Next slide. Wow, it's lunchtime. In the shift from efficiency to anticipation, doing the same things faster and cheaper won't be sufficient. So it's not, we're still going to try not to be wasteful. And you're still always going to be looking for ways to be more cost effective. That's all still important. But focusing on that as an objective, focusing on efficiency and cost reduction, that's a path of diminishing returns. So if we shift the objective to expanding value and meaning, what do we have? We have this new environment where companies are going to be capturing financial value through differentiation and deeper relationships. They'll do that by continuously getting better at addressing the needs and the aspirations of a diverse customer base. So the iceberg that we saw at the beginning of the presentation, this is how we start exploring all that lies hidden beneath the surface right now. And okay, I've given you the iceberg. Now we're going to just totally mix metaphors. We're going to stop trying to divide that pie of work into more pieces. Pie, by the way, that we're going to have to share with the robots anyhow. And in shifting the objective of work from efficiency and cost reduction to a more expansive value creation, it's not about just growing the pie, but breaking with the notion of a pie entirely. Instead, we get great berries. For the workforce, that means no longer being expected to act like machines. It's letting automation and other technologies do the routine work that, quite frankly, we weren't very good at anyhow. A lot of our processes and controls within companies are all about controlling for the fact that humans aren't very good at acting like machines. And it's having work that helps position each of us for the future and for our future. Now, this isn't just the province of kind of Gen Z or millennials. Everyone can gain value from work that is broadening their experiences. Everyone gains value from developing their skills and making them more relevant. So everyone, I've worked in a lot of places. Everyone I know who's in those workplaces can derive meaning from knowing that their work matters and draws on more of their full potential and what they have to offer. Next slide. All right, so this is kind of, this is always the point where people are kind of nodding along this, like, well, what would that even look like? What does it mean to be focused on value creation rather than, cost reduction and efficiency? Well, this type of work, it's not routine or standardized, because if it is, that would be going to automation. The problems and the opportunities are all context specific. So the opening to create new value is in the exceptions, where the emerging needs break the standard processes. Because if it's a standard process, it's probably automated. So where companies are going to create, new value and differentiation is by noticing that customers or one customer is starting to have needs that don't fit those standard processes anymore. In addition, the challenges will tend to be more complex. And because of that, they'll require groups of people, because no one person will have all of the skills and knowledge to develop solutions. And that goes back to JSB's entanglement. No one person can understand all of the multiple layers of cause and implication that come out of any action. And then emerging technology will be a collaborator, opening up new ways to see the unseen and develop new approaches. Next slide. So what would people be doing in the day-to-day? Well, there's 4 types of activities. It'd be identifying unseen opportunities, finding ways to adopt the customer perspective over time, and not just responding to current requests or satisfaction surveys, which is kind of what we talk about now when we talk about being customer-centric. But it's really finding ways to anticipate and look ahead. Next, they'd be developing new approaches. pulling people and resources together around an opportunity, and playing with the problem to understand or change its basic conditions. Third is the testing and tinkering. You're trying out an approach and collecting data to reflect on for the next iteration. And then kind of the fourth major activity would be you're learning through all of this. So you're learning both how to better address the given challenge or the particular type of customer, but you're also learning how to just get better and better at these actual activities. And it's happening at all levels across the organization, because right now there are certain groups within a company that do all of these things. But this is not the work of most of the company right now. And so this would all start permeating into people all across the front lines at all levels of the organization. All right, next question. Paige, just go ahead and click through this. Give it 3 more clicks. There you go. All right, cool. Go back. Thanks. So this work taps into more of what makes us human, and we'll need our human capabilities. So when I say the future of work is human, it's really tapping into all of these things which technology really can't do. We need these capabilities for the work we do, but they'll also emerge and be strengthened from the work that we do. And people are going to need organizational support and encouragement to really cultivate these capabilities, and to cultivate them in a way that's appropriate within a workplace. To be effective, people are going to have to integrate opposing abilities. So that's blending imagination with critical thinking, or curiosity with analysis, reflection with action. Workers will have to use capabilities like curiosity and empathy and imagination to get better at reading and responding to context, to notice what's changed and what's stayed the same, to recognize when the tool or approach they've been using is no longer appropriate, and go find something better. So to do that, we'll need a growth mindset, and we need new expectations. The idea of achieving mastery and then coasting for the rest of your career is really over. And instead, we have to expect to be always in learning and change mode, and always adapting to new practices around technology. And with all of that, we'll need people to be confident, flexible, creative learners. Learners who use a wide array of resources and modalities to skill and reskill themselves. And that's another reason why we believe these capabilities are so important, is because not only are they important to the work, but they're also what each of us needs to help us adapt our existing skills and seek out and learn new ones. Let's go ahead to the next slide. So, it's probably in the back of your head, the front of your head right now. You're thinking, this is not the way most of the workforce works today. And that's very true. Even among the most engaged employees, only 38% actively seek out challenging work in some surveying that we've done. So people that qualify, that we would slot in as, when you hear about worker employee engagement, it's people who would come out at the top as like, hey, these are fully engaged employees. Only 38% actively seek out this type of challenging work. At the same time, probably 95% of the people we surveyed actually said they were excited by the idea of new challenges. So it's a little bit of a disconnect. I think it's optimistic and positive that so many people believe themselves to be excited by new challenges. So why? What's going on? Why don't people act more human and use all of that power in their work today? One, some people just can't access their human capabilities for various reasons, the ones we're talking about. Many, but I'd say the majority of people just don't have the experience and the confidence and the kind of wraparound skills to use these types of capabilities like creativity and curiosity effectively. And then some just aren't motivated to put in the effort or to risk the discomfort of trying something new. Because showing up in a meeting and being curious means somehow not knowing what you're talking about or asking questions. And that seems like a small thing. That's a huge level of discomfort for a lot of people. So a lot needs to change, but it can be significantly supported by the environment. And that's why we've been talking to a lot of companies about this, because there are a lot of things about the organization that actually act against people trying these things out and using them. But it's also supported by the environment now that you all are part of. You today are the people who can start to create that connective tissue and the supports that are going to make it possible for the students we have today to become the people we need them to be tomorrow. So much of the learning they need can't come from classic classroom or training content. It needs to happen through action in the flow of work and life. And it'll happen through learning from each other in diverse groups, taking on meaningful challenges. But really key for that is in these groups, learning from each other, but with supportive guidance and practices. We know that there are obstacles to using our human capabilities in work and school. And so starting to remove those obstacles kind of from an organizational perspective is a good place to start as well. What else could you do though? I kind of very simply just break it down into 3 things. We can connect people. So connect people to each other through work groups that take on challenges, through cells that support and motivate individuals, small groups that really push each other, and then through communities of practice that help individuals acquire new skills and knowledge. You can also connect them to others and other resources beyond this community. 2 is really to create space to start practicing, places where people can exercise these muscles, these capability muscles, and do it in ways that minimize risk. One thing we're really bad at, in companies for a long time, we've been saying, fail fast or don't be afraid to fail. Everyone says that. Most people are really afraid to fail, and in part for good reason. And part of it is we have not gotten good at actually packaging our risk taking and packaging our experimentation in ways that actually minimize the risk. To say you should encourage your team to fail doesn't mean that you should step back and not do anything to mitigate the consequences of failure. So we have to get a lot better at creating spaces that minimize risk, that make it okay for people to explore and take good risks. And then the 3rd thing is really fostering and supporting new practices that support a learning mindset and that, again, continue to evolve with technology. Now, to be honest, how to cultivate and enhance these capabilities is still kind of an open question. Over the past couple of years doing all of this research, we talked to a lot of different companies and heard some good ideas. Some of them were having various levels of success, but it is still very much an open question of how to do this, how to do it at scale for many, many people. And I'd love to hear your ideas. Next slide, thanks. So what we do know is, this future of connected people in dynamic groups, constantly adapting and learning to address needs that haven't yet emerged. So this is an opportunity. Increasingly, it's also an imperative. Ultimately, though, the organizations that we work in, that we all work for, they may look very different. And, I said that pre-pandemic, now I think the world we live in, some of these organizations already look very different. They look kind of different physically, and that's starting to affect how they're going to look otherwise as well. That has huge implications for each of us. It's an optimistic future, but it also demands a lot of us individually. And so that's why I want to spend the last few minutes just talking about our own individual practices for learning and growth. Next slide, Pei. So what does this mean for individuals, for you and for me? I'm sure in this crew, everyone has seen this quote. Next slide. But I really, I include it because I really believe it's key. We have to find ways to learn how to learn, and we have to find ways that individuals can contribute and thrive in this environment without burning out and without fading out. So, we talked about learning, but what does that mean? Constant learning means being in a near constant state of readiness to learn. And it also means being able to let go of what's no longer useful. Collaborating with others means being open to trying new approaches, to receiving new information and diverse perspectives, and to trusting others and ourselves. And then this whole idea of using our human capabilities, like our empathy, like our creativity, our curiosity, that requires being willing to be vulnerable and imperfect and always a beginner. So all of these things, they take a lot of energy. This tree, this image of a tree is from a framework we called Roots and Shoots. So remember at the beginning when I was talking about the Center for the Edge and Better Up, I said my colleague and I had realized that in all of our research on trends and institutions and business and org practices, we were missing. And so our experience wasn't reflected in that. And everything we wrote was kind of up here. It was all in our heads, or maybe, to be honest, about 10,000 feet above our heads. It wasn't down here in our heart and in our gut. And we're really feeling that, like, how should we approach being in this world? So we built this framework really for ourselves. Given the ambiguity and the pressure of our always on and always connected world that both of us were really feeling, we're both, entering the middle parts of our years with young children and demanding jobs. We were really feeling these pressures and the pressure to keep up, to get ahead, but also to make the most of the moment. And what were we doing? So we're researchers, so we looked at how other people were responding, and we found two distinct ways. First, some were trying to move faster, to excel and achieve and push their limits. You think about, like, again, all this pre-COVID, but like the Spartan races, the 4-hour work week, overnight YouTube sensations, all of the, good God, the 40 under 40, 30 under 30, kind of hack your job, hack your brain, hack your life people, right? Everything's just, how can I move faster? And then there was this whole other set of people where the noise and the busyness was driving them to seek stillness and calm, often as a reaction to burnout. And so you think about, like, wisdom 2.0, mindfulness, meditation, gratitude, digital detox. I've always said, yoga has never been asked to do so much for so many. So there was a lot of momentum and, quite frankly, investment in capital in both the slowing down activities, which we call the roots, and in the speeding up activities, the shoots. But they tended to be isolated. So just as, roots and shoots alone don't grow and sustain a healthy tree, neither does speeding up or slowing down alone help us navigate the future, right? So we need both to integrate learning over a career and a lifetime. And so the power is really in connecting the roots and the shoots. And that's where you create the learning, and that's where, we each find our purpose and our passion. Next slide. So understand that we all do a lot of disparate things, often in reaction to some stress or pressure. We tossed out the concept of work-life balance. We hadn't found it, and you kind of only end up feeling guilty about not having it. So instead, we took some of the things that have typically been thought of as work-life balance, and we looked at how these things might come together more meaningfully to help us actually navigate this whitewater world and maybe actually enjoy doing it. So we identified 6 meta practices that feed this learning and unlearning cycle. And as you can see here in the roots, there's the slowing down. We have exploring core values, replenishing and re-energizing, and cultivating community. And there are a lot of existing practices that fit within this framework. We've listed a few of them. There's replenish and re-energize is about deliberately fighting the epidemic of constant busyness. One of my favorite practices, maybe just intellectually, is saying no. It's really hard. I'm still trying, still working on that. Cultivate community is about seeking external validation of your reflection and reframing. Because if you actually want to move yourself in a direction, your ideas have to eventually see the light of day. So you might exploring core values and journaling and thinking, that's all really important, but eventually you have to get out and start pinging those ideas off of other people and letting other people help shape them. On the shoot side, so you see here we have shape serendipity, we have be uncomfortable, and we have explore edges. In shape serendipity, you make space for the unexpected to surprise you. So just as saying no is a practice, so is saying yes. But the key is saying yes to the types of opportunities that are outside the norm. Explore edges and shape serendipity both became much more difficult during the pandemic. It challenged me and it challenged others to do things in a non-physical way. A lot of when we thought about shoots was kind of like actually getting out there and being among people, being in different environments, and just kind of having more of that visceral experience that really helps shake you up and open you up to new ideas. This whole past year, that's been really hard. So, there's other ways for shaping serendipity, like posting an article or sharing something meaningful on your front yard. Each of these is a way of leaving a little beacon out there that someone else might see and respond to. So the reason for this framework was that most of us don't think about connecting our various practices. And in organizations, many of them already support some of these, but they're scattered all over the place. Some are in well-being programs, some are in retention initiatives, and others are part of the learning agenda, and they aren't really connected in a meaningful way. We believe you need to connect these practices in a work environment that's increasingly characterized by ambiguity and that requires fluid collaboration and personal investment, and quite frankly, guarantees failures. The social, emotional, and physical stability of the individual will be core to the organization's success. And as individuals, we need to develop our own sets of practices that will drive our healthy learning and growth to keep us not just relevant, but engaged in the world. And our institutions and organizations need to help support these practices. And this is another favorite image of mine. Here again, technology comes into play. There's been tremendous investment in the past several years in transformative technologies to support these practices. And some of them, transformative tech can kind of sound far out there. Some of these are really familiar to you. The way my watch or a fitness tracker serves data up to my phone and gives me visibility into my own behavior, creates some accountability and little nudges. I can build practices that take advantage of that actually get me further toward my goals. There are devices like Muse or Trip that help us shift our minds into a more beneficial state without having yet invested decades of meditation or drugs. I mean, to be totally honest, I'm not sure I would have made it through the last year with a spouse and children who still liked me if I hadn't had my VR meditation app, Trip. I got through Zoom preschool and a major job change and November through January with some degree of equanimity and occasionally a little bit of grace. That helped me tremendously. So there are other devices out there that let us see our neurological reactions, that give us feedback to help us understand and regulate ourselves. So these are starting to be some pretty powerful tools to have at our disposal, and especially if we build and evolve our practices around these, in part based on what's kind of afforded by new technologies and the ways our institutions and our companies are changing. So that's about what I have for now. I think the workforce and your students, they need help. They need your help to be future ready. And more than training programs, we need to shift our focus from skilling to really cultivating and tapping into these most human capabilities. If we do this well, one, we'll start being able to close skill gaps and meet the demand for talent in a way that's ongoing, personalized, and supports the whole person. Two, we start moving from a place of fear and anxiety to one of optimism and agency. And then three, we have people ready and able to create more value, no matter how fast the world changes. And that's value for companies. It's also value for themselves and society. So with that, I'd say, taking it back to you, Laura, but I think, I'm happy to answer questions. I'd also just like to have each of you share your ideas, hear what resonates. What are you doing to cultivate and evolve your own practices for continuous learning? And I think importantly is, how do you model this for your students and for your peers? I think that is an open question.
Thank you so much, Maggie. That was amazing. I first heard Maggie again, BC, at an amazing Future of Work and Learning conference, and was just very inspired and activated. And I have to say, Maggie, I do think one of the ways I've gotten through the pandemic has just been to learn through it. I mean, just to keep learning and trying to figure out what is this meaning? What is this indicating? What choices do we have? What agency do we have? To watch how it's intersecting with, you know, racial reckoning and other kinds of issues in our world, and what opportunities we have. So thank you. I always love hearing you, and you have awesome slides. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Matt Carlson and just see what's on your mind. Matt is a super thoughtful and creative person, and I know that you probably have an amazing question or two, Matt.
Thanks, Laura. And Maggie, that was quite an inspiring and really thought-provoking presentation. I've read some of your previous work, but this, I think some of the information here, really bringing it down to the individual, and in particular, thinking about changing from skilling to tapping into capabilities, it makes me feel like we're having conversations, of course, as higher ed is across the country, education in general, but higher ed especially across the country is grappling with this question of if the way that we've been doing things for a very, very long time, some would say hundreds of years, the same way, is no longer working, but we're not sure now how to make the pivot, what it means really to shift from this sort of skilling to tapping into capabilities is, I think, a good way to put it. What would be your advice to folks who are beginning to think about, we're very steeped still in very traditional disciplines. And I don't know that the human technology interactions that you're describing and then really the need to create a very different way of working together. You know, at our best, I'd like to think we do some of that, but I also know that things like empathy, creativity, you know, some of those skills that I'd like to think, like I said, at our best that we're doing, but I still feel like we have a lot of change coming ahead for us. What is your advice to those of us that are, like I would say, still kind of steeped in our traditions?
Yeah, I think I knew this question was coming, and it's a really hard one because I think in higher ed, you are in a tricky position because there is a lot that's been gelled for a long time, right? And I think in this way, we're actually really fortunate with this past year because I think it has shaken up not just the status quo, but shaken up all of our comfort to such a degree that in those cracks, we actually have some opening, right? There's actually opening for movement that maybe wasn't going to be there before in terms of administrators, you know, state governments even, and your colleagues understanding that you might not know what needs to change exactly, but at least there's now an opening that something needs to change, you know, and that's a bit of a cop-out answer, but that has been, I think, when I think about so much of our work, it's like really just trying to make that clear, to make it clear that there's some imperative to change. And then I think the other thing is really trying to, you know, when I talked about like with the future of work and what students are going to need to go out there and do, I think it's kind of starting to model that just right within your own university of, I don't know the answers to this, but the fact is each of these is going to require people really coming together and really trying to figure out like, what does it mean for us to work on this problem in a collaborative way? How would we actually use imagination against this? And really being kind of thoughtful and very like kind of exposed with that, you know, so that it's not, and this, you know, easier said than done, but like, there have always been cross-functional teams that come together, you know, a task force, you know, and a lot of the work we did was like, there's a big difference between a work group working around a shared outcome and a task force, and really spending some time thinking about, you know, universities are full of task forces, plural, and committees, right? But like, what does it mean to actually be a group of peers working together to try to come up with answers, and not just one answer, many answers, and to view it as like, you're not making the 10-year plan, you're making the next 6-month test to see if you're right in your assumptions, right? So really kind of, you know, and I think Laura got at that a little bit at the beginning of just like, how do you really start thinking about, partly it takes some of the stakes down a little bit, right? Of, you don't have to disagree with each other if you're only making a decision about the next 6 months. You're going to try this out and see if what you learn confirms or disconfirms kind of your theory about where the university can go. And I think that's pretty countercultural to maybe what you do right now, because of things like budgeting and other things where you feel like you need to set out plans for the long haul.
I wonder if we're spending too much time thinking about right and wrong answers and not enough time thinking about the way that we get there.
It makes the stakes up so high, right? You're like, you know, you have to argue for your department or your whatever it is, or your idea, because you're laying out what the future is going to be for 10 years, right? And it's versus kind of like, yeah, how are we going to be? What's our approach going to be to the world? You know, how are we going to work through this as a process? There are times when, you know, I think people can be too process oriented. You know, there is an outcome as well, but like really trying to figure out, like, make a bet on how you think the world's going, kind of from an outside in perspective, and then figure out where you think the university can add value in that direction. But then it's a series of little steps to learn a little bit more about what it's going to take to be the type of institution that you want to be for your students.
Thank you. I think I'll pivot to Alexa and invite you on stage, as it were. Alexa, what's on your mind?
Come on stage.
I'll invite you as a student person. Oh, not hearing you, Alexa, for some reason.
How is that?
That's awesome.
There we go. Sounds good.
Thank you so much, Maggie and Laura and everyone involved in the presentation. It's really very interesting and thought-provoking. I am going to kind of go away from, as a student, I do have some questions as far as what the four-year university looks like, and will it become kind of a dying thing, considering that you know, work as we know it is so unpredictable. What would you say to a student looking to go into a university trying to choose a discipline? Or are we going to, would it be smarter to go to a more well-rounded approach towards like liberal arts? I'm just curious what you think would be the best approach for someone interested in seeking higher education.
Yeah, interesting. I think, you know, two parts to that question. One is to say what discipline you decide to major in doesn't matter. You know, that's a large privilege to be able to say that. I know I didn't have that privilege when I went to school, right? I went to a great school, but I was like terrified of not getting a job when I got out, right? So I majored in engineering. Have I ever used my engineering? Not directly, but you know, so I understand that there's a strong desire to know that you can be employed when you come out. So I don't want to say don't pay attention to that, but also recognize just how little it matters in some ways. What I see is that most people have to get that first job. If people are really starting to develop this learning mindset, this ability to, and honestly, a work ethic and a learning mindset, what discipline you choose would matter a lot less. I'm a little bit biased because I don't want to say technical skills don't matter. They matter a ton, and they can make life a little easier for you, certainly as a young person getting a first couple of jobs. I think everyone needs to be very technologically literate, and especially data literate. But sitting here out in Silicon Valley for so long, I think a far better thing is to have people steeped in liberal arts, to understand not just what technology can do, but what unforeseen good God, the number of unforeseen consequences that might have been foreseen if someone had read literature or history or anything else. So I really think that becomes actually increasingly important as we get really powerful technology. So having some understanding of technology is important, but also really, I think classic liberal arts are still a really important discipline. And what I will say too is, like, I look at, if you look at like the founder of Slack, he was a philosophy major, right? I mean, he clearly learned some coding as well, but he's not an anomaly out here, right? There are a ton of very specific technologically trained people who work out here. The people leading a lot of the companies and the people that found companies often come from pretty diverse backgrounds. So I think that's something to keep in mind too, is that we tend to think it's all kind of one or the other, and it's not. So yeah, that was not just playing to the crowd of saying go liberal arts, but even my engineering degree came from a really strong liberal arts school, because I could not abide the thought of going to an engineering school. So yeah.
Thank you. I actually do have one more question. So as COVID clearly changed what we know is like the conventional office space, do you think that is going to stick around long term? And what are some of the drawbacks to that? As it seems like work from home, it's been understood to increase productivity. So
yeah, I think so many layers to that. I think one is just, we toss around the word productivity a lot. It's actually really hard to say, well, what productivity means for anyone who's not working in a manufacturing or sales role. Productivity tends to be how I feel about my productivity. Did I feel like I had a productive day or not? When we think about like the work I was just talking about and kind of knowledge work, it's like, are you fooling yourself that you're productive because you got a lot of X done, versus the most productive thing you could do maybe is having exposed yourself to three different conversations, right? So our own ability to assess productivity is pretty limited. So back to the kind of COVID question, I do think, in June, everyone's like, this is going to be work forever as we're all going to work from home. I don't think that's the case. I think, I would love to work at home for, 80% of the time, but for that to be effective means that everyone else in my family has to get the heck out of my house to make it nice for me. And I don't think I'm alone in that. I miss being able to go and bump into people. So what the implications are going to be is all of the kind of innovation, serendipity, and other things. You can get at some of it virtually. I was amazed how well I was able to onboard to a whole new company completely virtually and actually have connection and feel belonging and whatnot. But it's hard. I think one thing this year has taught us is that we need human connection, like actual human connection, and not just through the screen. And there's so much of that. We can kind of, this is decent technology. I can read your facial expressions and it's okay. And as long as we don't have a lag, we can chat, but it's not the same. And then the other big drawback, and the reason I don't think it's ever going to go fully to just work from home, is you and people of your age, all the people coming into companies. I mean, this is how we all learned how to be in our profession or be adults in the world, is through our work cohort. And I think that's right now a huge gap for people. And I see it in my younger colleagues as well. It fulfills, it's not just social, it's just kind of the whole person of you as a young adult. A lot of that is about how to go out and be in the world. And part of that is your work. So, yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alexa. Those were awesome. Matt, any other questions from you, or shall we pivot to go out to the audience?
I think there's some good questions out there, so maybe we can.
Okay. Rachel, are you still around? You didn't quite put these out there as a question, but Rachel Cunliffe in our conflict resolution program is saying, seems as if pre-neoliberal universities had some real assets that have been defunded and de-emphasized over the last 40 years or so that we could look at again and evolve while we dispense with the focus on vocational skills as part of undergrad. And I think that's important and interesting. And sort of one thing you didn't use the word play, Maggie, but I was thinking of play while you were talking about some of this, that there is some sort of playing with the past, and maybe because things have been de-emphasized by our government or society, doesn't mean they're not super important. And we may need to playfully or intentionally involve, bring them back.
And I think, I think one thing you see is you do have this big tension, and a lot of it is, the huge student loans and the cost of college. Like, that's put this huge pressure on governments to say, let's hold these guys accountable and make sure they're turning out students who can get jobs. And that's put this probably overemphasis on vocational skills. But it's worth keeping some parts of that, which is like, you do want to help people understand how to get out into the world. It's just perhaps been somewhat misguided.
I want to really underscore Rachel's other comment here. We can't just pivot higher ed without looking at how inequitably the mechanization and automation of certain kinds of work is going to land if we aren't also thinking about social justice in K-12 and the whole shebang of the complex of entanglement of inequity in our society. And Maggie, I just wonder if you, in all of your work, I know this came up at our last webinar quite a bit, just the future of good jobs, the future of equity in terms of the work landscape, future of work landscape. Any thoughts or lessons in that space?
Yeah, I like to believe, you've seen this past year, but even pre-COVID there are a lot of companies saying more of the right things about some commitment beyond just pure shareholder value in the bottom line. There are others that are starting to understand that a really unhappy activist or underprepared workforce, even if you're only concerned about the bottom line, is still bad for business. So there is, I think there's some movement and awareness that companies need to be thinking about, especially when they're bringing in automation, of like, what actually does happen to the people because there are actual jobs that get displaced by that, and really being conscious about how they move those people into new types of roles that aren't just the next one up that's going to get displaced next year, right? And so that's where really this capabilities training comes around. The work, just real quick story. One of the companies we spent a lot of time with was Quest Diagnostics. And so they had chosen to invest a lot in their customer care and call center employees to really help them be confident, empathetic, able to share their ideas, creative, curious, all of these things, and to work together in their pods to really come up with new ideas and other things. They thought they were doing that because they needed to be constantly on the lookout for new growth opportunities, because maybe diagnostics was slowing down a little bit. They could not have predicted what this last year would be for them. But thank God they'd invested in that, both in their customer care, also in their logistics and in some of their other operations, because suddenly this is a company that was at the center of the firestorm of like every week was kind of adapting to new testing, diagnostics and other types of challenges, new ways of like trying to get out to these huge testing sites or bring in more things. So they're actually, I think amazingly prepared for that. And it's just, I think, and the reason I bring that up is because call center employees in particular, when I visit, it's like a lot of them just have a high school degree. There's a lot of people with no college degree. And so it's, they spent a lot of time really not just trying to make them like get through more calls, but really training them in how to start using each other, how to start learning, how to do all of these things that we just talked about. And that means some of them rose up to be supervisors, some of them rose to other places in the company. But they could also just be better call center employees in some cases, and so they could be better at what they do. And they also had a lot of opportunities to go do other things, either inside or outside the company. And I think that was just a model. You know, the Good Jobs Institute at MIT was where I first stumbled on what Quest was doing. And I think they have some really good insights about how, you know, how to have good jobs.
Yeah. The Good Jobs Institute is a great resource. If anybody wants to check it out, we should put that on our resource list.
Yep.
Gokul has a great question. Hi, Gokul. With ambiguity as a core feature pertaining to the future of work, how can a faculty member at a university balance the art of being a continuous learner with their role as, quote unquote, the one imparting cutting edge knowledge and skills to students, better preparing them for the workforce of the future? That's a big question, but I think that's a great question, and one faculty probably feel a lot.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think one, and this is the writer in me, is I would just say, first the line at it is to take away the one imparting. You know, that maybe your role isn't to impart anything on anyone. But yeah, the guide on the side, it's, you know, I think it's being able to give some framework for students and some coaching to them side by side as you discover what the cutting edge knowledge and skills right now are, you know, and being able to talk about why you see that, you know, why you think this, whatever it is important now, and also what might change and you know, the almost certain obsolescence of it in the near future. So really understanding it in context versus as its own skill or technology.
Thank you. Rachel has another comment here. Just you mentioned borders and flow across borders. And then in the Schutz graphic, you talked about exploring edges.
Yeah.
And Rachel says, I'm interested in the borders within society, within those that can access, quote unquote, the promised land and those who live their lives on the borders.
Yeah.
I'm interested in how higher ed, among other institutions, becomes a checkpoint designed as much to keep people out as to admit people and manage flow. Also curious about the edge as defined by ecosystems as the richness found in overlapping spaces between adjacent social zones, and how exploring those needs to be included in those ideas. And interesting.
And I think that goes back to what Matt was saying too, about just how higher ed should think about its future as a university, right? And it's really back to exploring those edges, these things, these boundaries that we put in place, you know, and companies call it silos, but there is, you know, viewing them as a much more permeable, and that's kind of a rich area, you know, not just not just like, oh, let's do a collaborative teaching, although I think those are really cool too, where you have, you know, blend a couple of disparate domains, but like really understanding the domains are kind of a construct, and really looking for what is similar and what is different across a lot of really disparate ideas.
You know what this makes me think of, and actually what worries me a little, is I see a strong pushback by a lot of students when we do become the guide on the side and we engage in active learning. There's definitely criticism that we get. I've heard comments saying things like, "You're supposed to teach me and you're not teaching me."
Yeah.
That encapsulates, I would say, a theme that we're experiencing as faculty. I know many faculty are working hard to use what I would describe as cutting edge teaching practices designed to elicit exactly the kind of, you know, empathy, group problem solving, but that's what active learning is one way we call it. But there's definitely a pushback, and I can't help but wonder, is K through 12 even worse off than we are, frankly, in terms of preparing students for the world? And how can we do better in working with our K through 12 partners, which we must, in community colleges, to say, you know, it has to start earlier. We can't suddenly become a guide on the side with a student who is not wanting or prepared or ready for that.
Yeah, and especially, you know, you think about the students coming in, a lot of them have been drilled on like, there's a way to get into college, and it's, you know, it's going down this path. So I almost feel like, I don't even know if it's I think some of it is K-12. I feel like my kids' teachers do a pretty decent job of some of this, but I actually think it's more like part of it's also the parent problem, you know, and I put my generation in this of like, they're probably looking at it and saying, why do we pay all this money if you're in there, you know, collaborating with your peers versus learning from, you know, the best of the best. So there is a weird needing to bring everyone on board, and it's hard to say like where to start. So sorry, I don't have an answer, but I agree. I think that's a big problem.
And it's a great, I mean, I would also say, Matt, to you, like we're all going through it together. Also, this is a great example of all the intersections, you know, that probably teaching in the future means a constant process of introducing this idea that maybe the image you have of what a college class is going to be like and what your role as a student is and my role as a teacher is, maybe we're going to shake that up in this class a little bit and not just doing it, but really bringing people into that. Maybe that's going to be more of a constant feature of teaching for a while, like, because it's a constant feature of every other job. Like we're all in between this way, the old way of doing it and the new way of doing it. We're all in that space, and students are too. So look at the students who are taking online classes and in-person classes, for example, at the same time. They will be in the future much more.
And I will say, I mean, just looking at kind of Rachel's comment on here, and a couple of others as well, is and putting myself back in, you know, in their shoes when I was in college, that real fear of like, you know, that I need to be able to get what I need to out of this education. I'm taking time, I'm taking money, and a real fear. And so that's where some of this, the individual support on practices and as well as well-being, and this gets a little bit better up, but like that stuff's all really tightly connected. So for your students to be able to be, I think, open to this idea of like, hey, learning's going to look a little different. Trust me, you're actually going to get further along. They have to be able to release some of that fear and panic that they feel, you know. And so I think that takes some additional supports in the university.
Thank you, Maggie. Greg Flores has a wonderful suggestion here to help students with the cutting edge. What if majors had current topics, course requirements, or a future of blank as part of finishing the program? Give students a framework for exploring the ambiguities of the field or profession. I think that's an awesome idea, very creative. I'm in favor of it.
Exactly, because you don't, it's hard to design content, right? Content is what changes.
It always makes me, I always have the joke of a history degree. Like, how do you manage to get, like, there's always more of it every year. More history. Like, you have to come at it differently, right, at some point, because you can't do it all. So that's kind of true of probably every profession. Everything is changing so fast. Maggie, I have a really left field kind of question, which I'm just curious from where you sit. One of the issues we're wrestling with, the entire sector, not just PSU, is what is the future of the degree itself? And you know, we hear things about more certificates, more micro credentials, more just capacity, and that the sort of tyranny or tradition of a 4-year degree and a 2-year degree and a doctoral degree and all that. What do you think the durability of that is from where you sit right now?
Right. I will say, like, I don't know, 8 years ago, 10 years ago, we were hearing things of like, the degree is dead, you know, we're going to democratize everything, and you know, no one needs the degree. I was skeptical then, and I remain skeptical now, just because we're humans and people like to sort each other out. There's certain milestones. People do like to sort each other out, and that's not necessarily a positive thing, right? So there are some filters, but I think there are certain things that a 4-year degree or a 2-year degree represent as well, which is from an employer's perspective of an ability to complete something, to stick something, just, you know, stick it out through something. And so in that regard, I don't think they're ever going to go away completely. I think a lot of the buzz was from kind of ed tech people who really wanted to have new solutions. That being said, especially I think in continuing, you know, kind of once you're in the flow of work and everything, I think there's a huge role for a lot of these little micro learnings, micro certifications, and that's where you do get a lot of the technical skills, right? Of like whatever the latest thing is. And then, you know, one cool technology we'd looked at was this idea of really behavioral VR immersive interviews or performance reviews, where you can actually you actually demonstrate. So it's not just even a portfolio of work, it's like demonstrating in the moment your ability to bring these capabilities to bear on a situation. So I do think there's going to be a lot of that kind of thing where there's more texture added and more nuance added to just your degree, especially as you get past kind of that first job and into a second job. It's like, I think there are a lot of really interesting ways we can bring more to bear on that. And, you know, if you think about like, what is it? Group opportunity at work, there's a few others, but, you know, really trying to get at this idea that like 80% of our jobs listed or 90%, something like that, all require a college degree. A huge number of them don't need that, right? 45% of our population, or 55, 45, doesn't have a college degree. So you've just disenfranchised an entire huge segment of the population by saying you need a college degree for a lot of jobs that just don't need it, you know? And so I think that's kind of the piece to work.
Yeah. And based on what you said, it also seems like, I mean, you hinted at this, but the continuous learning that you described before seems like some of that's going to be informal, but some of it could be formal too. That there's a huge, it just feels like market, if we want to call it that, but just a huge ecosystem of people that want to refresh their skills and need to and want to do that sort of formally, as well as, like I say, informally. But that seems like a huge.
And I do think that's a big role of the university maybe going forward, is that even for technical skills you can take online, there is an element of learning together or learning on something that you can work on. And, you know, so it's kind of, you know, I hate to use the word platform, but I'm in Silicon Valley, so we'll use the word platform, but like how do you use the university as a physical platform to connect people with each other, provide them a place to, you know, to learn or to practice things in a safe way, and expose them to new ideas, not just once at their 4-year, you know, out of high school, but like ongoing. You know, how do you rethink how you kind of facilitate and help people really develop these practices of learning, you know? And I get more excited about the informal ones, but I think that, you know, we can't underestimate, like, there's a huge need for, you know, data scientists or whatever it is. Like, go get yourself a few skills and you'll have a better chance at, you know, whatever that job is. It doesn't mean you have to have a degree in it. It just means you have to have some, you know, some fluency. So those things are really valuable as well.
Well, thank you so much. We're coming to the end of our time. I really appreciate just so many insights and great participation from our audience. Thank you all so much. I want to just remind everybody that we do have 2 additional webinars. We're going to post all 4 of these webinars on our webpage when we're done. Next week, May 6th, how can it be May? We're doing a really interesting webinar. It's a little bit different. This one's called Equitable Prosperity and the Future of Work. And we'll feature a variety of leaders in higher ed, economics, and beyond, working on sort of what the state is doing to promote a future of equitable jobs. It's just really important and a very local sort of perspective. And then on May 13th, we'll have a panel of us, some of our leaders, Provost Jeffords, Dr. Ami Lambert, myself, Greg Flores, and we'll do a few student panelists as well. Oh dear. And sorry about that. Speaking of human. And we'll be talking about just our own reaction to this series and some of the things that we're either doing or dreaming of doing to continue to help support and evolve PSU to be as future ready as it can possibly be. So I hope you'll be willing to come again and join us. Maggie, any last comments you might want to make as we wrap things up today?
You know, I think I've said enough, but really, I just appreciate you inviting me in and inviting me to be part of this conversation.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. And please visit the PSU Futures Collaboratory website. And we look forward to working for a great future together. And Maggie, I'll see you out there in the world. Look forward to seeing you in person one of these days. Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Maggie. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Alexa.